Good evening, everyone. This is Corinthia Benison, founder of RCM Renaissance Center of Mastery. Thank you for joining us tonight here on Black USA News. I am here with the lovely Eva Andrades, and we are going to be talking about education as it relates to mental health and its impacts. So again, thank you everyone who's out there joining us and listening in. Um, I think I'm freezing here. Okay, here we go. Eva, please introduce yourself to everyone and just let the world know who you are and what you do.
Yes. Welcome, everyone. And thank you, Corinthia, for this opportunity, this invite. My name is Eva Andrades. I'm a bilingual school social worker. My specialty is evaluations and working with children within the special education community. Um, I have a real passion for mental health and the issues that are rising from that and the connection, the way it's just really connected to so many other areas of our lives. So I'm really happy and excited to have this conversation today.
Yes, yes, because the educational system and youth and their just development process through COVID-19 has had a huge impact on their progress, on them, staying caught up in school and on the right levels and staying on track. So I just wanted to ask you, pre-COVID versus post-COVID, like what are the most drastic changes that you see in that transition back into the educational system, just from your perspective?
Yes, so we see a lot of anxiety. We're seeing this was a global event. And so even as I was preparing for this, it was a little challenging trying to get some 2022 updated data because we're still sort of kind of in it or coming out of it, or whatever perspective you want to give it, as far as, because it's not 2020. However, the studies are yet starting to emerge as far as the numbers and the stats. But I did find something I wanted to share from the American Psychological Association.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the percentages according to a study done in 2020. So they did a study and a survey. It was actually a survey done with 1,000 parents at that time. And at that time, 71% of parents said that the pandemic had taken a negative toll on their child's mental health. And 69% said that the pandemic was the worst thing to happen to their child, according to this national survey. Also, AmericanPromise.org did also a survey of 3,300 high schoolers, and that was conducted in the spring of 2020. Yeah. And they found that close to a third of those students were unhappy and depressed more than usual. Yeah. From March to October of 2020, the ER emergency visits due to depression increased 24% for children ages 5 to 11 and 31% for youth between 12 and 17 years. Mm-hmm. And that was a 24% and a 31% increase from 2019, from pre-pandemic. Yes. So it's definitely, the numbers are there. It's showing the increase of what's happening really around the world and in our nation. And it's led to a lot of changes. I wanted to just share a couple of things that this crisis is leading to. Like right now, Illinois, under a new law, the public school students in that state will be allowed 5 mental health days per school year. Mm. As a result of the mental health crisis. They're also implementing a lot of trauma support for the students. Nevada will allow 3 mental health days per school year. Florida hired about 45 new mental health coordinators. Virginia is redirecting their funds from the school police a large amount of their funds from school police to mental health and mentoring programs. Georgia embarked in a screening process of over 30,000 students between pre-K and 12th grade, just to kind of see where they were socially, emotionally. And they've also done a lot of training in trauma-informed practices, which we've done as well. New York has done very good with that, as far as hiring and the funding. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of, like, to your question, if you're anxious in a classroom and you're sitting there from 8:30 to about, depending, 2:20, 2:30, it's very challenging for everyone involved, not just the students, but the teachers. You have a lot of teachers, a lot of staff that has been out, and my heart goes out to the teachers and the work they do. But it's very challenging all around. The parents, everybody's been affected. According to the 2022 State of Youth Mental Health Report, I'd like to share a little bit of what they found. They found that the top 5 challenges right now that children are facing, the number one was 44% said it was schooling activities. 38% said the remote learning. 30% said making new friends. 28% was grieving the loss of a loved one, which that's another thing. My God. And 28% said moving because the pandemic has affected so many different levels of our socioeconomic system. People losing their jobs. The rents right now are going very higher, and a lot of families are being forced to have to move because they don't have the finances. So it's just many levels.
Yeah, and I've had other social workers on, and we talked about just the social determinants of health and overall, and how, tying in the education as we're having this conversation now, there are more vulnerable populations of students, and we definitely have to talk about equity, and, even the school segregation, right? And Black and Hispanic communities. A lot of that is tied to poverty. And so the outcomes, are more negative. So when you have students who are experiencing homelessness, they're more likely to have more absentee issues, definitely have more behavioral issues. And then that, definitely affects the graduation rate or how they just evolve and what services are allowed to help them stay, engaged and stay on track to graduate. And so I just want to see your perspective as a special education teacher. How is that? How are the special education students? They're transforming back into the normal cycle of school, and with that challenge from going to remote to that hybrid learning. How did that impact them, or just from your point of view as a social worker in that space?
Yeah, so to speak to the poverty issue just really quickly, the silver lining, believe it or not, with the pandemic was that childhood poverty went down to historic lows because of the financial provision that was given, those checks that families were receiving, but they were temporary. So a lot of that it's not there anymore, and so it's having a lot of effects on the families. Our special education community, historically, our children in special education have always had higher rates of bullying already, and social stigma, and so given now the pandemic and the effect it had on socialization, yeah, we're seeing a lot of our children having a hard time um, catching up academically. Let's not even mention socially. That's another.
Yes,
issue.
statistics show like for each level through the pandemic for mathematics, students were on average 5 months behind, and for reading, average of 4 months behind. So I could imagine the kids, with special needs who, needed that extra attention, needed that extra time to learn and, wasn't able to get that. And it's like, how do you make up for that? Like, how do you make up for lost learning?
So, fortunately, there was some funding that was given to the public schools.
Hmm.
And so the schools started rolling out what they call the recovery program.
Hmm.
And that's like an after school tutoring program that related not just to the academics, but also to like the related services like speech, OT, PT. And so the students are able to enroll in that and hopefully try to catch up. We also have the summer rising program this summer where children will be able to go to school and also with the hopes of catching up.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been very challenging because even with those programs, we've had a lack of staff to implement them.
Yeah.
So now it's like the funding is there, but the staff isn't because it requires working an extra, let's say you do your full day as a teacher or a special education teacher, and then you're asked to stay till 5:30, 6 o'clock. Depends on how the schools have the liberty to implement and create their schedule. But on a weekly basis, it could be 2 days, it could be 3 days a week.
Yeah.
Also, it also creates an issue for the children that are already in busing, for instance, because now they will miss their bus, and which is the way they get home. And then now the parents have to either figure out a way to pick them up at a certain time or find someone that can go get them at the schools. So logistically, that's been challenging because a lot of kids that need the help can't stay after school. So some schools have opted to do like Saturday programs, but then that's another issue, 6 days a week. The parents get tired, the kids are tired. And so it's been challenging to implement that. But, schools are trying their best. And we're just trying to work as a team. We have the social emotional learning that has been also added to the curriculum so that the teachers can implement that in the classrooms. And the approach has been more like an all staff, all hands on board kind of approach. And it's got its challenges. I can share about some of the barriers.
Yeah.
You know,
We had a comment though. I just want to read a comment that was here. Why are we so focused on catching up? Why don't we reset the levels to honor what the students have been through? Okay, when you want to?
very good question. Yeah, and very good comment. Absolutely. That's a systemic thing. We have to, the parents have a voice and powerful voice and coming together and supporting and backing up even the educators and everybody coming together and talking about a new way, a new approach to learning and teaching, where we add that piece, where that becomes part of the comprehensive approach.
I definitely.
I think one of the things is the stigma that's behind a lot of this. The stigma behind, mental health, the stigma behind things like even special education and what it provides and what it does, how our children view that are in that are receiving those supports. And so I wrote a few things here about some of the barriers right now. There's this mistrust. There's a lack of access, a lack of insurance, secondary health effects of mental health. Also, the funding. We have funding now, but honestly, we can't depend on temporary funding to address a long term. It needs to be part of how we do things. It just has to be that piece has to be so important that it's part of how we approach the whole issue. It can't just be 3 years or 2 years, because that's a way that a lot, that's one of the challenges, the funding. We're very short. We were already short. I'll talk to, as far as my profession. I'm a bilingual clinician. I have a cluster of schools, which means I have more than one school. I actually have 3 schools and 2 on-call schools. But we also get redeployed to other schools to do evaluations. And we have a shortage of bilingual clinicians. And bilingual, I mean all languages. You know, we have children from Asia. We have children from all around the world, and who require evaluations, and getting the clinicians to do that. There's a shortage on that. Then we lost a lot of staff this school year due to the vaccination mandate. So we're even shorter staff now. So, and then everybody needs healing.
Yeah.
Everybody needs healing.
Yep. We have some more comments coming in. So one is trauma is impacting the classroom. And I would definitely, you know, say that young people who aren't, again, having that resource to mental health services is definitely going to show up in the classroom, whether it's just being distracted, like you said, the anxiety, a lot of frustration and rage. And, when those behavioral outbursts occur and we have increased in bullying, increased in fighting, it's a lose-lose for everyone. And so definitely, I think that schools should definitely expand their workshops, expand the time allocated to mental health, because it's something that young people definitely have to get more accustomed to, breaking that stigma. And then when you do that in that setting, it kind of sets the tone among that group, among the class, and instead of having it individualized. So I definitely think more workshops are needed for young people in the schools. Eva, if you want to, the next one is people don't believe that students living with disabilities have economic value. Our school systems are about making good employees and customers.
I'm sorry, it was cutting up a little. I didn't hear the full question.
Yeah, so the comment was, people do not believe that students living with disabilities have economic value. Our school systems are about making good employees and customers. So basically, is that students that receive SSI or have disabilities don't get gainful employment? Is that part of maybe the comment where it relates to as far as economic value and contributing to society? And I mean, would you translate that as such, Eva?
Well, I think that a lot of it also depends on what the disability is and the resources that are available, and the training, as far as training. Because there are, depending, again, we have 13 classifications. So depending on what the classification is in the IEP, there's programs that are within the DOE to address that. Yeah.
Yeah, and employers are encouraged to hire, people with disabilities, on different levels as well. If there's, sticking to that, that's another conversation. But I definitely think that, we definitely have to keep allocating resources to young people who are disabled, and give them, the fair access to care. And if you're saying our school systems are about making good employees and customers, I mean, there's a lot of things that's not taught in schools, right? You don't learn about finances. You're not, trained to be an entrepreneur. You're in a curriculum, and you're learning, and college and that further education, sets you up to aspire to join the workforce and pursue a career. So, I don't think that is anything wrong with that, but I do think that we can expand our education, whether it's academic and non-academic, and offer other avenues of learning, which is more holistic. And I think that comes with more expanding career development programs, having young people be exposed to different things younger, because then they can cultivate and learn other skills that, may lead to entrepreneurship, may lead them to being a worker. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's good to have options. It's good to have young people exposed to different things, and people of different backgrounds. I think diversity is another important attribute in youth development. And a lot of inner city kids, depending on zoning, depending on where they are, often are in an environment that's, where they're around kids that are from the neighborhood and look like them. And they're not exposed to different ideas and different experiences of having more diverse populations. So I think there's a lot of, like you said, Eva, there's a lot of layers in the educational system and developmental process that don't, that kind of keep the cycle going. And so we definitely have to come up with better solutions. And I think having schools, working to expand social work access, and even partnering with community-based organizations is a great solution
Yeah.
to not having siloed approach with how they manage mental health in the schools, because I think that's another parental trust factor
Mm-hmm.
with schools and students that often is a strong barrier to detention, or just that, that tug of war in a way with how the school system is handling their child.
Mm-hmm. And then the issues of race, equity too, and you know, um, special education went through a major shift. I would
Mhm.
say a little over a decade ago, when some of the research was showing that a lot of our children weren't graduating, and it went. So there was a big shift from special education being viewed as a place to being viewed as a service.
Mm.
And so LRE means least restrictive environment or setting. And so the goal is to support the children in the least restrictive environment. So what does that mean? Um, to take a child that has, let's say, well, that has a classification and provide the supports they need while still giving them access to the curriculum and to peers, to their peers that are, developing in their classroom. Also, the arts are very important. Finding out what type of learner the child is, and you'll have often children that are struggling, for instance, academically, who are very gifted in drawing and art and music and dance and singing, and so the creative, just kind of exploring and the helping develop that creative side of that child and helping them feel successful, because when that intrinsic motivation is there, where they feel good at what they do, that energy transfers to the more challenging things, and so it helps. And so that's been a big shift with special education. Also, we had a high rate of Black and brown boys in the special education system, and so that had to be revisited and looked at as an organization, as a community, to realize that yes, a lot of our babies were getting classified that really didn't need to, that they just needed certain supports and interventions. And so that's where the culturally sensitive piece comes in, how to be culturally adequate, learning about different cultures, teaching them, accepting the differences. And so that's some part of that shift that has happened. And so it's not, you don't see in these days that quick jump to evaluate a child who's having a bad month or a bad season, whatever that looks like, weeks, months, but more of an intervention and a more of a recovery approach. And yeah.
Mhm. There's another common fallacy. Fund schools based on the jobs that kids get after school. Districts are about STEM because the jobs are in STEM. They don't think about PLWD. I don't know what PLWD means. Do you know what that abbreviation means?
LWD,
I don't know.
maybe
But
she can clarify.
yeah,
People living with disabilities.
people living with disabilities. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so, I think definitely, tech is a growing, market. If we could definitely offer programs that give students the opportunity to learn about a lot of these jobs that are competitively paying, that can, you know, substitute. A lot of kids don't wanna go to college. A lot of kids don't, that's not something that they aspire to do, but there's other certifications out there that can land them gainful employment. And there's a lot of soft skills that they could learn, whether it's Excel, building a website. There's employment in that. There's employment in introduction to coding. There's a employment in A+ networking. These are just um, great options for young people to, learn and see if that's a field that they would want to go into and explore. But again, it's definitely about having that access, having a teacher to teach that, and go into a school, or having a place where a child can go after school to learn those things and those skills and get those certifications. So that is, a challenge and a huge need, I think, with providing more opportunities for young people in certain school districts that don't have those outlets or resources.
Definitely. And we still have a lot of work to do. I'll take, for instance, our children with autism and
Yes.
how are we training. This is one of the major concerns of educators and the parents. How can my child become self-sufficient depending on their level of ability? There's a neurodiversity movement now where it talks about where they're starting to highlight the strengths of children with autism. And from music, we've had some nonverbal children, but the moment they hear music, it's like they come alive. To our children that are within the spectrum that, for instance, are geniuses in math, or
Yes.
like you mentioned with IT, and how do we make room for that and for them, and how do we advocate for them and create those job opportunities for children, that are part of this population. It's all, we have a lot of emerging things. And again, as any institution, we look forward to how we're gonna learn and train ourselves, right? Because that's another challenge to training, right? We're talking about mental health, for instance, and being trained on evidence-based practices on what's helping, what's working, how do we train our children, and how do we help them social emotionally? Again, like for instance, what I'm talking about with autism, just teaching them the social emotional piece, the social cues, how can they establish relationships,
Yeah.
how can they, everything from how do they fall in love and create that relationship in their families, to how do they get meaningful jobs where they can be independent in the future. So those are all things that are, very they're challenging.
Yeah.
But the good news is that they're coming up in the conversations, and I think that that's part of the change, talking about these things.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely reading statistics, they're showing an increase, right, in, like, the negative outcomes, and kind of transitioning it from the special education into, just regular education students as well, and the challenges that they're facing, and just more of, like, the students that are, like, persistent, right, where they go to school and they stay longer than they should, right? They don't graduate on time, and there's things that are, like, keeping them enrolled, whether it's, not passing the regents, or just their attendance, just things that keep them not getting, that diploma. And I'm curious to like know that statistic and how that has increased. Because I think a lot of kids, across the school system, are having those issues with, graduating on time, keeping up. And, it's like, what do we do? How can we be preventative? How can we, tackle that? And it's just, it is really a collaborative effort, of just having the resources available. And that takes people, that takes funding, it takes everything really lined up and checked across the board to implement in a timely manner. And it's like, time is of the essence. And I think mental health now is getting the attention that it definitely needs, along with the funding to support what's required across, the whole community. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I just definitely want to just thank you for, taking the time out to be on, but want to kind of get your ideas of really real solutions that you would think would be impactful um, going forward.
So I think that I think some of the solutions lie in also shifting our mindset. I think that I started talking about the stigma. I will end talking about the stigma because it's attached to a lot of the funding and the views that we have regarding mental health. And mental health across the board, whether it's a special education children or our general education children, need to be addressed. So I did a little list here of some of the things that I think that would help. I think that trauma focus in, trauma focused cognitive behavior therapy.
Yeah.
And that training and being able to hire clinicians that can do that specifically would be great. They don't have to be long sessions. It could be 12 to 16 sessions. The evidence shows that they can be very, very effective for the children. There's strong outcomes in that. We can also do things like some practical things, even like increasing physical activity.
Yes.
Those have been interventions. There's some studies that show that three 80-minute sessions a week of physical activity for 24 weeks had very good emotional outcomes on the children. The kids felt better. It released serotonin. It decreased anxiety. It also helped with the socialization. If you're creating teams in a sport, whether a basketball team, or instead of limiting it to one basketball team for the school, breaking that up and creating teams within that cohort of the classroom or the grade. Those were very, and they're practical and they're very good solutions. Also, talking about emotional health, like the informing and giving children that empowerment to speak about that. Small groups where the children feel comfortable having these conversations, even including pandemic topics within the school day, talking about those things. Anxiety, depression, even the financial piece, the struggles of having to move, the struggles of living in a shelter, because we have a lot of children that are in shelters and have been. In New York City, we have it's very sad, we have a very high rate of homelessness.
25 for each class.
And most of them are children below the age of 5 years old. And addressing that and being able to share that or talk about it in maybe sometimes in an anonymous way where the teacher can lead that conversation is a form of empowering and validating. Cognitive behavior therapy, which it deals with behaviors, thoughts, patterns, how you see yourself, the narrative, the thoughts you're telling yourself about yourself. Those are other approaches. Training the staff, which is a lot of what has been happening. The staff is being trained on having more of a recovery-oriented approach versus a punitive approach, understanding instead of not why are you doing it, not what are you doing, but why are you doing it? How are you feeling? What's going on? Those are some of the approaches that I think that the school can help with, just to mention a few. And that's just some of the stuff that I wrote. The other stuff has to do with other things like outside of the school, supporting parents, creating parent groups that are comfortable to the parent, not something that has to happen during the school day, because they work. And then we have low turnouts and sometimes there's complaining. No, we have to accommodate and work with them and figure out ways. Right now, the best thing, I think, one of the best things we have is the Zoom or the Teams or the ways to connect.
Exactly.
So even with parents through the system. So doing, being open to that.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of us who have been around for a while, training and being open-minded to that and opening that door, even in our own personal practices.
Mm-hmm.
Training, a lot of training also, um, across the board from administrators down to the staff in the cafeteria. It's so important.
Yeah,
Everybody to be
the
one
whole
mind.
environment, the whole culture of the school. And do you think, just the teachers as well, because, we're talking about the educators who have everything to do with the child's experience, right? And do you think teachers, have been given those tools for themselves as a wellness approach and their transition into balancing remote learning, adjusting with curriculums and trying to, still keep their students engaged, and keep their students on track. As a teacher, I'm sure they take the ownership of, what they're set out to do and what their, task is. And has the, in your opinion, the educational system been meeting the needs of the teachers through this pandemic as well?
Um, I think that all schools have cultures in them, right? So I think that it starts with the culture of the school from administration down. If you have a very supportive administration, and I've been lucky enough to work in schools where I've seen that, the way you treat your staff is trickles down to the way the staff is going to treat the students and even the parents. So when you have that mindset of collaboration versus an us and them, you are already making a difference. You're creating an environment that's welcoming to conversation, to honesty, to trust. Um, I think that that's crucial. Our teachers, I have two sisters that are teachers, and I feel that a lot can still be done. There's always room for growth. My heart goes out to them because they are managing not one child, not two, not but a minimum of six in our smaller classrooms to anywhere to 30 kids. And they too are human beings, their moms, their dads, their grandmas, their children, they're going through also. They went through the pandemic with us. And so just keeping that in mind and being empathetic to one another and treating each other with kindness and
Mhm.
respect can go a long way. Even just saying, I hear you, I hear what you're saying, validating how they're feeling, taking it, when they say or they suggest something or they say they need help, providing that help and that support in the classroom is crucial. Instead of pointing fingers, let's not point fingers at each other. Let's work together, right? Because a house divided against itself falls apart. But when we're united, we can do a lot of things together.
Yeah. Yep, and I think it's definitely the collaboration is like the key word moving forward, between schools, community, and again, getting the community involved, parents and families. And I think that you go back to that keyword trust, right? Because when you trust, things kind of get done because there's not walls, there's not barriers, there's less friction, and things get more seamless. So I definitely think, parents, right? Them really feeling confident that their child is in good hands. I think, well, I've read too, like a lot of parents that, have kids that are autistic, they end up moving a lot because they're really focused on trying to find the perfect school that meets their child's needs. Or even if their child is experiencing bullying, it's like a life transformation they have to go through when they're trying to find the right school, that can meet the child's needs, and then that just trickles down to everything else with the child having to now readjust, right? And as a family feel supported in their transition from one school to the next? Like, how does that handoff even happen? Are they confident in, that transition? So I think it's so much facing the special education, students with autism, and, like, we definitely have to, you know, make things better, on all fronts and do better. So it is, again, a collaborative effort. And I would say too, from your perspective, um, as far as just like workload, when we talk about even in healthcare, and I've had other conversations, that burnout, when you're managing X amount of cases, like that affects, your time, your delivery of care to your client, so it's so much. And do you feel like you've experienced burnout throughout this process where you're kind of like, wow, I'm just really overwhelmed with, my cases or what I need to do? Like, have you experienced that?
I've had my moments.
Yeah.
It can be very challenging. And because, for instance, because I'm a bilingual clinician, we get pulled in all kinds of
Yeah,
ways.
you're, like, in high demand. Yeah, you're like, yeah, that language, having that is gives you more of a pool, right? You can service, reach more people, more clients, yeah, more kids.
Yeah, and so it is very challenging. And then it's like with the any other profession. It's like with the teaching profession, for instance.
Mhm.
I believe that they don't get the honor they deserve for the work they do. And granted, everyone, there's bad apples in every profession, but it's not fair to say just because of one experience, right?
Right.
Everyone's that way. And so when we see, for instance, I'm a mother of three kids and a grandmother of one, and raising three children, that's not easy. And then having a classroom, like I mentioned before, with the teachers and conversations with our teachers that I work with, and even in my own family, um, it can be, they suffer burnout too. I think that it's across the board. Um, and I advocate for self care. Figure out something that makes you that work that gives you that refreshes you, that relieves you, that gives you that value again, that makes you feel like you're making a difference. You
Yeah.
know, find that thing that can do that. And it's okay to say no sometimes too. It's okay to take a step back. Um, we also need mental health care. We lost a lot of people, a lot of first responders. We lost a lot of people through the pandemic, from COVID, but also, unfortunately, from uh, the rate of suicide was very high too. And so being able to find someone that you can talk to, um, when you might be getting those thoughts, so feeling overwhelmed or hopeless, is
Mhm.
very important. Finding that connection. And again, it goes back to that social piece, that connection. Even if you have, some of the research shows that even if you have, that one person you feel connected to, that person can make that difference when you make that call, or when they pick up on something, on what's something that you might be going through, or a mood changer. So, yeah, we need to definitely grow in that area. I think that, as a nation, we should look at how we look at educators who are educating and raising the leaders of tomorrow. We should
Yeah.
look at how we educate our children. Are we incorporating the mental health piece there? Are we doing applying a comprehensive approach? Because then that has to come in there. We can look at how we're training our clinicians. There's a shortage right now, even for, mental health monolingual. And I'm not talking about clinicians only that do evaluation. I'm talking about across the board.
Mhm.
Um, People are looking for counselors, and it's very difficult.
Yeah.
One of the things that has facilitated it is that people can now get counseling from a different state,
Yeah.
which it's part of that silver lining. But
Mhm.
these are challenging times. They really are. And, find whatever sustains you, whether it's spirituality, friendships, connection. Um, we have to find that, because, we deserve that. We need that, and we deserve it.
Yeah. I definitely agree. And even with taken from what you said, a lot of the access to care and even like the virtual, there's access, but it definitely is different, that in person, remote learning versus in school learning. Like it is a trade-off with that. And young people, they need to have those interactions. They need that personal engagement. They need to be around friends. They need a specific, there's an environment that fosters like, great development, good, positive interactions, and you thrive off that for young people. So having, that taken away, that isolation and, a lot of those anxieties and depression have escalated. And even unfortunately, the suicide rate has gone up. But I definitely want to champion, like you said, CBT therapy. And I think individual and family therapy is something that really helps people, right? Because that's critical to the healing and the growth. And I definitely think families, need that, and even more so than before, due to the pandemic. So yes,
Yeah.
you know,
And parents can help with that by simply at the earlier they start having these conversations, like, how do you feel? If
yeah,
that's okay, really, how did your day go? Um, Even conversations like that on how you're feeling, you're not having a good day, it's okay. Just validating children's emotions and how they're feeling as early as they can talk. It's
yeah,
okay. Sometimes, our perception maybe might be, oh, it's not such a big deal. If it's a big deal to the child, it's a big deal.
yeah,
And if we don't validate that, we're teaching them that their voice doesn't matter, that they're not going to be validated, and they'll grow up that way thinking those things. And so, as if they're crying over something, if there's tears, it's important to them, and just kind of having that eye to eye contact and saying, "Wow, you seem to be very upset about this, and how can I make it better? Or do you want to talk about it? Or maybe we can talk about it later if you don't want to talk about it now." I think that bringing up these conversations is very important, and getting and taking again the stigma out of it. Even the language we use. I think that if we can shift our language on how we refer to it, to mental health, can really bring a very empowering message. And I found some statements that I wanted to share about removing the stigma.
please,
Um, so some of the ideas is, instead of using mental illness, let's use things like a mental illness. Instead of making the person, make it a condition, right? Things like statements like afflicted by mental illness, or this person suffers from mental illness, or is a victim of mental illness. Instead, we can say things like living with mental illness, or living with mental health challenges. It just takes away that sense of like something is like wrong in that sense. Like,
yeah, like the extreme aspect of it, right? And I think another good word. It's a lot of
uh-huh.
feedback. I'm sorry, but I think another good word is disorder, right? A mental health disorder, because a lot of times it's mild to moderate in some cases, and sometimes we just use illness, 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 and it's like, no, some people again, it's can just be having a situation. It could be, like you said, a life transition. This period in time they went through X, Y, and Z, and it's not something that is, forever, labeled for this person. It's not always that. And I think we just are just default to that, society wise. And we definitely have to normalize a lot of the everyday distress or, emotions that people are facing through COVID and a lot of the grief and trauma that they may experience in general. We definitely need to work that word down. It's not something that we should be using as the, leading idea. Something's just terribly wrong, and you just get the negative feedback. And that perception just stays.
And one last one that I thought was very good was, instead of, don't use normal behavior, use things like usual behavior or typical behavior, because that also takes away, like you said, the stigma, and even the way the person views themselves when they hear that. Like, what's wrong with you? That's one of the first comments you hear. And instead of jumping and saying, what's wrong with you? We should pull back and be like, what's the matter? What's going on? What happened to you? So it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you that you're getting triggered right now by A, B, or C.
Yeah. And I definitely agree with all that. And just kind of going back to equity and access, I think those are the things that I think keep people from seeking out the service, and let alone it being accessible. So I think it's a two-pronged thing where obviously we have the stigma, and then, it's not being accessible. It's just like it's out of mind, out of sight. We don't even, we just say we're going to just go through this or build resilience, and we kind of just, right? That's the word that we kind of use. We cope and go through it. And that isn't working, right? It's not something that we could continue to, go through without having those resources accessible. And I think also, narrative therapy, psychotherapy, let's have a conversation. Like you said, let's ask questions that are hard to answer. That could be, again, peeling back a lot of pain, a lot of revisiting a lot of trauma, but you have to acknowledge it. You have to be aware, and you have to get those tools, and work with a provider to be better, and make better decisions. Be mindful of your behavior surrounding things that you go through.
There's so many factors, Corinthia. It's such, I mean, there's so many sub topics that can come out of a conversation regarding mental health. And so sometimes the best way is to zone in on certain topics. Like suicide is one topic.
Right.
The criminal justice system is another topic, where we have over 40% of our young men and women that have some form of mental illness or mental conditions are in the criminal justice system. And how do we navigate that and create some sort of intervention? I had read an article that said that there are more people suffering from mental health challenges in our prisons and in our hospitals. So,
and the conditions of prison,
this
a
year
lot of
we
policy
decided, right, this year, and I'm sure that wasn't the only one. Just really kind of visiting all the different. There's just so many sub levels to this. Yeah, sub levels to this, and it's very challenging, but having these conversations is great because it brings it to the surface, and we can continue to research and learn and teach ourselves and talk about it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So, I mean, we have a few minutes. Do you have any closing statements that you would want to just say to everyone listening?
I think that culturally, I think that some of our cultures are a little more challenged as far as their view on mental health and even therapy, family therapy. I come from a Latino culture where you don't share your problems outside of the family. And so that creates a lot of other problems, including our health issues and other issues with, alcoholism and other ways of kind of self-soothing. So I just want to encourage people of all cultures that it's okay to, even if you're the first one to break out of that, the first one to talk about it at the dining table, to talk about it in during Thanksgiving and Christmas, if you're the first one to put it out there, like, hey, when I was a kid, I felt anxious. I really went through this and that, and I'm in therapy now, or I'm going to start therapy now, or I think we should talk about this, or, and just kind of that helps also to, again, take the stigma away from it by speaking about it, and in a way where it's liberating, empowering, and it's not blaming anybody, because sometimes that's one of the people hold back. Oh, so oh my God, I was a bad grandma, I was a bad mother. Oh my God, you're in therapy because of me. So a way of having those conversations where there isn't that blame, like how you did this or because of you. And I think that when there's that tone to it, I think it can be received and embraced easier.
I definitely think so. I think you were saying just kind of normalizing it, because I think oftentimes too, when you're describing that, that is so true with the family dynamic, where you want to share things that you're going through, and you're worried about your perspectives, right? Oh, how are they going to judge me after this? Or again, like the parent feeling like they failed their child, and then how you repair, because it's like there's something broken there, right? How do we fix this relationship, right? And it's like, how do we fix dysfunction in a way? And that is a lot. It's a lot of deep-rooted things, and you have to work to get to the root of the problem. And it's like, getting a family together to do the work collectively is challenging, let alone having that individual maybe get that help, and then they go back to their home and they're the only one who got the therapy, and they're trying to like foster that conversation. Like that is again another burden, right? So it's for young people, they have enough that they're kind of dealing with, right? So it's like to have that expectation is like not realistic. But I
And
definitely
they're
think,
so brave. I love them because they're out there and they're gonna say it, and they can transform their whole families. They're
yeah,
out there. I have some wonderful children that
yeah,
have taught me so much all the time by
yeah,
the stuff that they'll say, and I'll be like, wow, and I'll reflect on that and think and do some reading and educate myself, and it's like, wow, that's so good. Thank you.
yeah.
But I do
We
have
all
to
can
say
learn from each
that
other. That's the beauty of it too. When you start sharing and being honest and open,
yes,
there's a lot of learning, growth, and healing. Like all those things really happen, So
as long as it's safe, because
yes,
in some toxic environments that sometimes you do need to you're not safe sharing certain things, or and you might have to remove yourself or create certain boundaries when
yeah,
there's a history of abuse, emotional,
of
verbal,
course,
psychological, even spiritual. You
yes,
might not, there's certain circles where you will not be able to share certain things
yeah,
because you don't feel safe, so
that's a fact.
or you'll be attacked, or and we don't want that either. So
Yeah,
always gauge the environment, the
mhm,
the circle you're in, the place where you're considering sharing,
yeah,
and you have that internal wisdom and sense of feeling of, is it safe to say this, or maybe try the waters a little, and it's okay. Don't feel like you have to just teach everybody and go
yeah.
for it. You be safe.
Watch it.
Yes, be safe, and then find a circle of people that you can do that with. People who think like you, who are open-minded, who are
Mhm.
comfortable with those kind of challenging conversations.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Well, thank you, Eva. Again, this is Corinthia Benison, founder of Renaissance Center of Mastery. We're a mental health clinic looking to provide services in the Harlem community. It was a pleasure having you on and talking about your expertise and education and weighing in on this extremely important topic that impacts our communities, our country. So thank you for your time this evening. Everyone, thank you for listening. And I'll be back next week at 7 p.m. on the dot. And you all have a blessed evening.
Thank you, Corinthia. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Black USA News. Good night, everyone.